For 13 months, I was boyfriend number 3. I didn't know there was a number 1, a number 2, a number 4, or a number 5. I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the one who was different. I thought that was the whole point of us, that I had seen her for who she really was, that she had chosen me above all the other Farangs circling around Bangkok with their wallets open and their judgment switched off. Phillip Robertson, 66 years old, remote worker from Portland, Oregon, the man who thought love was enough of a credential to make him immune to the oldest game in the book. I was wrong about almost everything. And sitting here now, coffee going cold on my desk, I still catch myself remembering the good times before I remember that none of them were real. I need to be honest about who I was before I met Thanida, because none of this makes sense without that context. I had retired from a mid-level logistics management career at 62, spent 2 years getting bored out of my mind in a house in the Pacific Northwest that was too large for one person, and then discovered that my skill set, remote coordination, supply chain documentation, client communication, was actually quite portable. I picked up 2 part-time consulting contracts, kept them for years, and suddenly I had income, flexibility, and absolutely no reason to stay in Portland. My marriage had ended a decade earlier, a mutual slow-motion dissolution rather than anything dramatic. My adult kids were busy with their own lives. I had friends, but not the kind of deep, daily friendships that anchor you to a place. I was, if I'm being completely honest with myself, exactly the profile that Thailand is built to receive. Middle-aged Western man with money, freedom, loneliness, and no one to tell him to be careful. I landed in Bangkok in what was supposed to be a 3-month experiment. That was 2.5 years ago. I'm still here. The city got inside me the way cities sometimes do, the noise, the food, the density of everything, the feeling that every street corner is a whole separate universe. I found an apartment in a good building in the Asok area, got my long-term visa sorted, and started building a routine. Gym in the mornings, work from a cafe or my apartment until mid-afternoon, evenings open. I met expats at the gym, at co-working spaces, at the kinds of bars where Farangs congregate to complain about Thailand and secretly love everything about it. I met Thanida at none of those places. I met her at a cooking class, of all things. It was one of those half-day tourist experiences near Siloam that a fellow expat had recommended as a way to actually learn something about Thai food rather than just eating it. She was there with a friend, both of them presented as young Bangkok businesswomen treating themselves to a weekend activity. Thanida was 28, wore her hair pulled back, laughed easily, and spoke better English than anyone I had met in months. Her friend giggled through everything and barely participated. But Thanida was genuinely engaged. She corrected the instructor once on a seasoning point, politely but confidently, and was right about it. I thought that was the most attractive thing I had ever seen. I was 66 years old, and a woman correcting a cooking instructor about lemongrass was the most attractive thing I had ever seen. I should have recognized even then what that said about my state of mind. We ended up talking for the rest of the afternoon. She worked, she told me, as an independent business consultant, helping small and medium Thai companies with operational efficiency. She had studied at a university in Bangkok, had done a brief internship in Singapore, and had been running her own client roster for 3 years. She was living in an apartment she paid for herself in the Lad Prau area. She had ended a long-term relationship about 8 months prior. He had wanted to move to Chiang Mai. She wanted to stay in Bangkok, and they had wanted different things from life. She told me all of this with the particular frankness of someone who has decided to let you know who they are up front. I thought she was being vulnerable with me. I now understand she was being efficient. She had a system, and the system involved getting the relevant biographical details established quickly so the relationship could move to its next stage. She asked for my line ID before I could ask for hers. That detail lodged itself in my mind as romantic at the time. She was direct, she knew what she wanted, she wasn't playing games. Looking back, I understand now that she already knew what I was. Not me specifically, not Phillip Robertson, but the category I represented. The age, the nationality, the fact that I was living in Bangkok rather than just visiting. She knew the type, and she knew the approach, and asking for my line ID first was not boldness, it was efficiency. She had other messages to answer that night. The first few months were everything I had quietly stopped believing I could have. We texted constantly, met 3 or 4 times a week, fell into the easy rhythm of a couple who genuinely enjoys each other's company. She came to my apartment, I went to hers. We tried restaurants across the city, and she always knew something unusual to order. She remembered small things, that I preferred iced Americano to hot, that I was particular about sleep and needed the air conditioning at a specific temperature, that I found loud bars exhausting but would sit in them if the company was good. She made me feel known. That is the specific word for it. Not just desired, not just appreciated, known, seen, understood. For a man who had been largely invisible to himself for a few years, that feeling was extraordinary. It was also, I now believe, manufactured. She was good at this, professionally good, in a way I could not recognize because I had never encountered it at that level before. By month 4, we had made a verbal commitment. Exclusive. She said she wasn't interested in casual relationships, that she was at an age where she wanted something real, that she hoped I wasn't the kind of man who said one thing and did another. I told her I absolutely was not. I was not, as far as I knew, that kind of man. I was a 66-year-old man who believed he had found something genuine with a 28-year-old Bangkok businesswoman, and the age gap did not worry me the way it should have, because I had decided long before I met her that it didn't need to. She was mature. I was young for my age. We balanced each other. This is what I told myself. This is what I told my friends back home who raised an eyebrow over video calls. She's different, I said. She's not what you're imagining. I know how that sounds now. The first thing I noticed changing was the phone. Not dramatically, she had always been on her phone. That was normal in Bangkok. Everyone was always on their phone, but the quality of her attention to it shifted. She started keeping it face down on tables when we ate together, which she hadn't done before. She started leaving the room when calls came in, stepping out to the balcony or into the bathroom. When I mentioned once, very casually, that she seemed to be on her phone a lot, she explained that a client was having a difficult quarter and needed more contact than usual. This was completely plausible. I accepted it completely. I was not the kind of boyfriend who monitored his girlfriend's phone usage. I was the reasonable, trusting, modern kind. I told myself this specifically. A few weeks after that, I noticed she had started being vaguer about her schedule. Before, she would tell me, I have client meetings Tuesday morning, and then I'm free by 2, and she would show up precisely when she said she would. Now the edges of her days got softer. I'll come by after I'm done, without a when. I might be free this evening. I'll check. Once she had been reliably punctual, and now she arrived late and with explanations that were slightly too smooth, as if they had been prepared rather than recalled. I told myself this was the natural evolution of a relationship past its honeymoon period. Schedules get complicated, people get comfortable. The early obsessive precision of new love gives way to something more relaxed. I was not going to be the insecure older boyfriend who demanded accounting of every hour. The thing is, I was already doing the accounting. I just wasn't admitting it. I was noting times and inconsistencies and filing them away in a part of my brain I refused to officially access. I have thought about this a lot since. There is a kind of lying to yourself that is very sophisticated, where you don't actually believe the lies, but you perform the belief because the alternative is too destabilizing to contemplate. I performed belief in her explanations for months. I gave prize-winning performances of a man who was not suspicious at all. Red flags continued to accumulate with the patient regularity of a tide coming in. She bought a new phone and set a passcode immediately, without offering to show me the number or mentioning it at all. When I noticed and said something light about it, she looked at me with an expression of gentle exasperation and said that, of course, she had a passcode. Everyone had a passcode. It was basic security. Did I not have a passcode on my phone? I did have a passcode on my phone. I backed down. I went home that evening and sat with the specific discomfort of a man who has just been successfully argued out of a position that he was actually right about. The logic was undeniable. The conclusion she had walked me toward was false. Both of these things were true simultaneously, and I could not hold them together without it feeling like paranoia. So I let it go. A month after that, a name started appearing in conversation with slight frequency, not prominently, just occasionally. A colleague named Crit, who was helping her with a project. Crit thought this about a proposal. Crit had a contact who might be useful. Crit was funny in a way she described once, and then seemed to regret mentioning. I noted the name. I did not say anything about noting the name. What I said, to myself, was that I was being exactly the kind of paranoid, controlling Farang she had accused me of risking becoming. I said to myself, she has colleagues. She is a professional woman with a business. Colleagues are allowed to exist. Crit was allowed to be funny. I was 66 years old, and I was policing my own suspicion like a hall monitor and giving myself demerits for noticing the things I was noticing. There was a weekend in late September when she told me she was visiting her mother, who lived in Nonthaburi, about 40 minutes from central Bangkok by BTS. She did this occasionally, stayed a night or two with her family, which I had never been invited to meet in any formal way, though she had mentioned them often enough that they felt real to me. This particular weekend, she went quiet in a specific way. Not the silence of someone with their family, with the ordinary distractions of being back in a childhood home, but the silence of someone who has simply placed a particular phone on a particular setting. Her replies came irregularly, as if she were checking in rather than present. She sent me a photo Sunday morning of a Wat near her mother's neighborhood, bright and sunlit, clearly taken with the intention of placing herself somewhere. The photo was beautiful. I said so. She sent a heart. I looked at the metadata visible in the photo. I'm not a technical person, but you can right-click on images and see information, and the location stamp was somewhere that was not Nonthaburi. I told myself I had probably misread it. Bangkok's mapping was inconsistent. I knew nothing about how phone metadata worked. I put the phone down and went for a run. She stopped staying over on Friday nights, which had been a consistent pattern for our first 6 months. The first time it happened, she mentioned a family obligation. The second time, she was tired and said she slept better in her own bed. The third time, I didn't ask at all, because asking 3 times about the same changed behavior would have been controlling. I lay awake on those Friday nights in my apartment in Asok with the air conditioning at exactly the right temperature and tried to read and could not. In October, I can pinpoint this precisely. I was walking near Central World on a Thursday afternoon when I thought I saw her. A woman in a yellow dress getting into a taxi from the hotel side entrance, turning to say something to a man standing on the pavement beside her. It was a brief glance. The taxi pulled away. I was perhaps 30 meters distant and at an angle. I told myself, with absolute conviction, that it hadn't been her. Her apartment was nowhere near that area. She was at a client meeting that afternoon. It was someone who looked like her, which was simply a thing that happened in a city of 11 million people. I went on with my afternoon. My left hand was shaking slightly, and I made myself stop, noticing that. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with an expat named Ron sometime in November. Ron was an Australian, mid-50s, had been in Bangkok 8 years, owned a small import business, and was one of the more reliable members of the loose Thursday evening group at a bar near Terminal 21. Ron was not a man who offered opinions on other people's relationships. He was quiet, observational, mind your own business in the particular way that long-term expats often develop. When he pulled me aside one Thursday and said, in a very low voice, that he thought he had seen Thanida at a hotel bar in Sukhumvit the previous weekend with a man he didn't recognize, a European, well-dressed, not Thai, I felt a reaction that I am still a little ashamed of. I felt angry at Ron. I said very calmly that Ron must have seen someone else, that Thanida had been with her sister that weekend, that lots of women looked like her in this city. Ron nodded once and let it go. He was kind about it. He knew exactly what he was watching happen. I went home that night and told Thanida the next day that a friend had mentioned seeing someone who looked like her in Sukhumvit. She laughed and said Bangkok was full of women who looked like her. She kissed me. She was completely unbothered. That should have told me everything. By December, I had stopped sleeping properly. I was waking at 3, 4 in the morning, and lying in the specific stillness of a person whose brain will not stop running probability calculations. I began, on those nights, to do things I was not proud of. I checked her Instagram from a secondary account, looking for tagged photos. I looked for a Tinder profile, not finding one, but not finding nothing either, because there was an old Bumble profile 3 years out of date, which she had clearly forgotten to delete. I Googled her name in combination with various terms and found only the professional things she had told me about. I was not sleeping. I was not eating well. My work was suffering in small ways I hoped my clients wouldn't notice. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror one morning and didn't recognize the particular anxiety in my face as a feature I associated with myself. There is something deeply strange about investigating someone you love. I want to be clear about this because I think the way it gets described from the outside, man goes detective, checks phone, follows his instincts, flattens the actual experience into something that sounds rational and purposive. It was not rational. It was compulsive and recursive and deeply painful in a way that had nothing to do with any evidence I found, because I wasn't finding hard evidence. I was just finding the same pattern of absence and inconsistency that I had been finding for months. I would check her Instagram story views at 11 p.m. and find she had posted nothing, and this absence of posting would feel significant, and then I would tell myself that absence of posting meant nothing, and then I would check again at 2 a.m., and the absence would feel significant again. I was eating maybe once a day. I had dropped several kilograms in a way that my gym friends noticed and which I explained as intermittent fasting. I was not intermittent fasting. I was not hungry. My stomach had contracted into something approximately the size of a fist and was available for food only under protest. I tried a different approach in late November. I suggested, very casually, that we take a trip together, maybe Kanchanaburi, for a long weekend, somewhere outside Bangkok, a change of scene. She was warm about the idea and said yes without hesitation, and for 3 days I felt the weight lift, because surely a woman who was maintaining multiple serious relationships would not agree to a 4-day absence from the city unless she was in fact what she said she was. We went. It was beautiful. The River Kwai at dusk is something I will always carry, irrespective of the context in which I saw it. She was present in Kanchanaburi in the way she had been in the first months, attentive, funny, genuinely curious about everything. I convinced myself, during those 4 days, that I had been wrong about everything. I came back to Bangkok certain that I had been constructing a paranoid fiction and that she deserved a better version of me than the one who had been running background checks on her Instagram at 2 in the morning. I was happy for about 10 days. Then the Friday nights resumed their absence. Then the phone was face down again on the restaurant table, and I understood that Kanchanaburi had not been an indication of my error. It had been a recalibration. It had been good management. She had sensed the pressure building, and she had relieved it, deliberately and skillfully, and sent me back to Bangkok reassured and temporarily blinded. I was dealing with someone much better at this than I was. I confronted her in December, just before Christmas. It was not a clean confrontation. I raised my concerns in the careful, reasonable, modern man way I had decided to do it. I said that I had noticed some changes, that I felt some distance, that I wanted to ask directly if everything was all right between us. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that I will remember forever. She said, "Philip, I think you watch too much YouTube about Thai women." She said it without heat, almost fondly, as if I were a child who had been frightened by a story. She said that she understood why Farang sometimes had trust issues in Bangkok, that she had seen her friends' relationships with foreign men suffer from exactly this kind of paranoia, but that she had been nothing but honest with me, and she needed me to trust her, or she didn't see how we could continue. I apologized. I told her she was right. I told her I was sorry. And for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, something relaxed between us. She stayed over more. She was more present. I thought the conversation had fixed something. I understand now that she had simply recalibrated, tightened her operational security, redistributed her time, reduced whatever had been causing the observable changes I had noticed. She was managing me. I was not a boyfriend. I was an account. January arrived, and with it came the particular stillness that follows a crisis that hasn't actually been resolved. I was calmer on the surface, but not underneath. The 3 a.m. awakenings continued. I started, almost unconsciously, keeping informal notes, times she arrived, times she left, gaps in communication, the occasions when her replies slowed from minutes to hours without explanation. I had a spreadsheet. I am 66 years old, and I had a spreadsheet tracking my girlfriend's behavior, and I told myself this was just organization and not what it clearly was. It was a Saturday morning in February when everything ended. She had stayed Friday night, which she was doing again more regularly, and she was in the shower. Her phone was on the kitchen counter where she had left it. I want to be precise about this. I did not go looking. I was making coffee, and her phone screen lit up with a line notification, and I saw, from 2 meters away, the preview of the message clearly enough to read 2 names in it that were not mine. The notification was from a conversation labeled simply Mark UK. The preview said something about next week and a hotel name I recognized near Sathorn. I stood at the kitchen counter with the coffee still brewing. I could hear the shower running. I picked up the phone. There was no passcode. She had been here, trusted, safe, and had not locked it. I am aware that what I did next was a violation of privacy. I make no defense of it. I opened line. What I found in the next 4 minutes remade my entire understanding of the previous 13 months. There were not 1, but 6 active foreign male conversations beyond myself. I say beyond myself because I found my own conversation there, and I could see, from both sides, the careful maintenance of it, the messages she sent me and the messages she sent them, running in parallel, calibrated for each person. There was Mark from the UK, who had been in Bangkok the previous weekend and was coming back in 3 weeks. There was a man I will call the German, whose messages were in German with some English, and whose pattern of contact suggested he wired money on a monthly basis. There was an Australian in Perth who sent long emotional messages, which she answered with shorter but carefully warm ones, stringing a thread of hope through weeks of distance. There was a Swede whose messages were very recent, suggesting a newer relationship still in its early warmth. And there was one more, an American, older than me, I thought, whose conversation thread went back further than any of the others. I put the phone down. I picked it up again. I put it down again. The coffee finished brewing. I stood in my kitchen in my apartment in Asok while the Bangkok morning came through the windows, and I looked at the evidence of a professional operation that had been running alongside what I had believed was my life for over a year. She came out of the shower 20 minutes later and found me sitting on the couch. I had not moved except to turn the coffee maker off. She looked at me and she knew immediately. She had the particular face of someone who has been caught and is already running through the available responses. I placed her phone on the coffee table between us without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at me. She sat down in the chair across from me. What followed was not the tearful confession I might have expected. She was, in some ways, impressively composed. She began with the denial, which was brief. She asked what I thought I had seen, as if there were multiple interpretations of 6 different male contact threads organized online. When I made clear that I had read the conversations, she moved quickly to the deflection, which centered on the fact that I had violated her privacy and that the conversation should be about that. I was amazed by this. I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity, that she had actually rehearsed these responses not for me specifically, but because situations like this must arise in a career like hers, and preparation was part of the professionalism. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, how long this had been going on. She said the other relationships were not serious, they were just connections. Some of them were financial arrangements she had before we met. She said she had not thought it was necessary to tell me because she was planning to wind them down. I asked her if she was currently sleeping with other men. She looked at the window. I had my answer. I asked about the German and the monthly transfers. She said that he was someone she had known for a long time who helped her family and that it was not a romantic relationship. I had read the messages. It was a romantic relationship. She was looking at the window again. I asked about the American, the older one, whose thread went back the furthest. She was quiet for a while. Then she said that he had been with her before me, before several of the others in fact, and that he visited Bangkok twice a year, and that she had not been able to end that one. I asked why. She said he was important to her. I don't know what that meant, and I did not ask her to explain it because I recognized that we had arrived at the outer edge of anything she was going to tell me honestly. She was performing partial truth in order to seem cooperative, carefully rationing disclosures to protect whatever she needed to protect. I asked one final question. I asked whether she had ever, at any point, intended to be with only me. She looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I could not fully read. It was not guilt exactly, and it was not contempt exactly, and it was not completely without warmth, which was somehow the worst thing of all. She said, "I thought you understood Bangkok." Then she picked up her phone, went to the bedroom, got her things, and left. I sat in the apartment for a long time after that. The sun moved across the floor, the street noise rose and fell in its Bangkok patterns. I thought about the cooking class where she had corrected the instructor about lemongrass. I thought about the Friday nights she had stopped staying over. I thought about Ron pulling me aside at the bar in November, and the careful, quiet way he had tried to tell me, and the way I had thanked him for the information and then defended her to his face. I thought about the spreadsheet on my laptop and what it said about who I had become without being willing to admit it to myself. The German transferred money every month. I had been one of 6. The Australian in Perth was sending those long emotional messages into what I now understood was a carefully tended reply system designed to keep him sending them. The Swede was new, maybe 2 months, maybe 3, and I wondered what version of the cooking class afternoon he had experienced, what version of the lemongrass correction and the asking for your line ID moment. I wondered if she did the cooking class regularly or whether she had found other introduction settings that worked as well. I wondered how she managed the scheduling across 6 men, the communication rhythms, the remembered personal details. There had been a period, around month 5, where she had asked me careful questions about my family and my work history. The kind of questions you ask when you want to know someone deeply. I had been moved by her interest. She was building a file. That was what it had been. She was maintaining an accurate biographical index so she could speak to each of her accounts as if he were understood. I called Ron that evening. He picked up on the second ring. When I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said he was sorry. Not "I told you so." Not anything about the night I had dismissed his concern. Just sorry. He had seen it before. Most long-term Bangkok expats had seen it before. There is a particular kind of relationship management that some women in Bangkok, and some men, treat as a legitimate profession, not bar work, not the obvious transactional arrangements that every guidebook warns you about, but something more sophisticated, more emotionally complex, built on genuine apparent affection and sustained through meticulous psychological maintenance. The foreign boyfriend portfolio. Multiple income streams, multiple emotional insurance policies, each man believing he is the real relationship, and the others, if he knows about them at all, are the past. Thanida had what appeared to be 5 simultaneously, possibly more. I was number 3 on the Line app, which told me something about when I had arrived in the rotation. I moved through the following weeks in a state I can only describe as reorganized. Not broken, exactly, more like a building that has been structurally re-examined and found to have load-bearing elements that weren't where the architect said they were. I kept working. I slept badly. I ate inconsistently. I took very long walks through parts of the city I didn't know because I couldn't sit still. I found myself on one of those walks near the hotel by Central World, where I had seen the woman in the yellow dress in October, and I stood on the pavement for a while doing the arithmetic I had refused to do at the time. What I kept returning to, on those walks and in those sleepless early mornings, was the question of scale. Not just that she had been seeing other men. I had by then come to accept that fact with the numb acceptance of someone who has looked at irrefutable documentation, but the scope of the organizational achievement. I knew, from reading the threads, that at least one of the men, the Australian, had been sending money monthly and expected exclusivity. I knew that the German relationship appeared to have been running for over 2 years. I knew that at least one of the others had visited Bangkok within the previous 6 weeks and had stayed in a hotel near Sathorn that she had apparently recommended. The logistics of this were staggering in a way that was almost, in a completely detached and intellectual sense, impressive. 6 men, 6 communication channels, 6 biographical databases she was maintaining. The Kanchanaburi trip she had taken with me, how had she managed that 4-day gap with the others? Had she told them she was visiting family? Had she been deliberately quiet across all channels simultaneously? Had she staged it differently for each of them? I would probably never know. But the operational intelligence required to run something at that scale over that duration without any of us detecting it until an unlocked phone on a kitchen counter ended it, that was not improvised. That was practiced. That was a skill set built over time. I have spent considerable time since trying to understand my own failure of perception because I think it is important to be precise about this. I did not miss the signs because I was naive or unintelligent. I missed them because I needed to. This is the specific confession that is hardest to make. I was 66, and I had been lonely in the particular way that is not dramatic or acute but chronic and low-grade, the kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself as loneliness but shows up as restlessness, and the vague sense that your life has lost a dimension. Thanida had returned that dimension. She had made me feel known, and the feeling of being known is so powerful and so rare that when you have it, you will protect it at almost any cost, including the cost of your ability to see clearly. My exceptionalism belief, the fatal flaw that was identified correctly before I even began, was not about thinking I was smarter or better than other men. It was about needing to believe that what I had was real, because the alternative was to admit that I had paid, in time and emotion and the specific currency of hope, for something that had never existed. She called me once, 3 weeks after that morning. I didn't answer. She sent a line message that was 3 paragraphs long and which I read once and then archived without replying. It was a well-constructed message. It acknowledged fault without specifying it, expressed something that read as genuine regret, and floated the possibility of a different kind of arrangement going forward. I recognized it as a professional communication. I did not respond. I am still in Bangkok. I thought about leaving and decided against it because leaving would mean that the city had become associated only with this, and I refused to give her that. The apartment in Asok is still mine. The Thursday evening group still meets. Ron and I have coffee on Wednesdays now, which is a better thing that came out of a worse one. I work, I gym, I walk the city's late evenings when the heat drops and the streets fill with the particular Bangkok quality of life that I came here for in the first place. I have not started dating again. I am not, at the moment, interested in dating again. That will probably change. I am a patient man when I need to be. What I understand now, and want to say directly to anyone who is reading this or listening to it, is this. The system that was operating around me was not improvised. It was skilled. The relationship management that Thanida was running across 6 men simultaneously required genuine capability, emotional intelligence, logistical precision, memory, the ability to modulate warmth by channel and context, the discipline to maintain coherent, separate narratives over months and years. I do not say this to excuse anything. I say it because the failure to recognize it was not a personal failing in the way I initially blamed myself. It was a structural information asymmetry. She knew what she was doing. I did not know what she was doing. She had done it before. I had not experienced it before. The contest was not fair, and the outcome was not, in that sense, a reflection of my particular stupidity so much as my particular inexperience with a specific kind of professional deception. That said, there are things I ignored that I should not have ignored. The phone changing, the Friday nights, Ron's careful, quiet warning, the woman in the yellow dress, the sense, which I had consistently and accurately and never admitted to myself, that something was wrong. Your gut does not run on insufficient information. Your gut runs on information you have not consciously processed yet. When your gut tells you something is wrong, the information is already there. You are simply refusing to look at it. If your partner's phone suddenly has a passcode it didn't have before, that is not paranoia to notice. If a name appears in conversation with a regularity that is slightly too high for the level of significance claimed, that is not paranoia to notice. If the texture of your evenings together has changed the quality of attention, the presence behind the eyes, the question of whether she is with you when she is with you, that is not paranoia to notice. If a friend, particularly a careful friend who doesn't usually offer opinions, tells you they saw her somewhere unexpected with someone unexpected, That is the most important thing you will hear that week. Listen to it. Don't defend her to his face and go home and think about how to file it away. Listen to it. I think about Thanida with a complicated set of feelings that I am still sorting through. There is anger, but it is not the primary thing anymore. There is something closer to a reluctant bewilderment, the same quality I have when I think about very complex systems, the feeling of encountering something that is genuinely impressive in its construction, even as its purpose is harmful. She was running an operation. It required real skill. The real skill does not make the harm less real. But I find I am more capable of sitting with the complexity of that than I expected to be, which is perhaps the only thing about this whole experience that reflects well on me. She was dating 5 Western men at the same time, possibly more, depending on how you count the arrangements that weren't quite relationships. Each of us thought we were the real one. Each of us, I am reasonably certain, had some version of the thought that we were different, that our situation was the exception, that the thing she had with us couldn't be replicated across a roster because it was too specific, too genuine, too particular to us individually. That feeling of particularity of being seen was the product she was selling. She was very good at selling it. And I bought it, 13 months at retail, with full confidence that I was getting the genuine article. I was not. And neither, in all likelihood, is whoever is reading this and thinking that their situation is different. Sometimes I wonder whether she loved any of us, in any version of the word. Then I remember that it doesn't matter. The question of whether a fire loves you is irrelevant to the fact that it will burn you if you stand in it long enough. I stood in it for 13 months. I have the scars to prove it. And I am telling you, with the specific authority of a man who ignored every warning available to him until there were none left to ignore. The signs are always there. The only question is whether you are willing to look